Hi, and welcome to Module 4. In this module, we have 3 videos, and we're going to be talking about record keeping and supervision. I'm Dr. Kristen Kinsevich, licensed professional counselor and assistant professor of counseling at Evangel University. So in this first video, we're going to talk about supervisor responsibilities. So exactly what are the supervisor responsibilities for record keeping? How do we keep supervision notes? What's the process for that? There's something called a professional disclosure statement. Maybe you've heard of that, maybe you haven't. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about supervision contracts and goal setting, session notes, and summative evaluations. So let's start with this idea of a professional disclosure statement. And this is a document that you would write as a supervisor that would outline some specific things. You can also Google this term and look a little bit more at maybe even some examples. When I first took some training to become an approved clinical supervisor, I learned about this and wrote up a document for myself. So some key areas that are included in this, number one is competence. So your professional disclosure statement should include specifically what are your areas of professional competence. This could include what types of populations you've worked with, what types of therapies that you are trained in and that you use regularly, basically anything that you are competent to supervise. So for example, in my clinical practice, I really have not worked a lot with very young kids. I have not used play therapy. And so if I have someone looking to be my supervisee and they want to learn all about play therapy, I'm really not the right supervisor for them because it's not an area of competence for me to be able to train someone on that. You can include your CV as well if that's helpful to kind of show the various experiences that you've had. And if you have any additional certifications, you would want to include those as well. Also, you can have another section that kind of describes the supervisory relationship and what that supervisee or student can expect from you. And so this kind of umbrella term falls under boundaries, right? So, how and when should the supervisee reach you? Should they contact you between sessions? And if so, when and in what cases? If you're going to see each other kind of on a daily basis because you're working side by side all the time, kind of when are moments where they can pull you aside and say, hey, I have a question versus things that they need to save for a scheduled supervision meeting. It's important that you do not just count kind of 15 minutes, 20 minutes here and there as kind of your supervisory time. That you have a dedicated weekly hour for supervision. And then, those other kind of questions can come up in between. Sometimes supervisors are like, well, we talked 3 times for 20 minutes this week, so good enough. That's not really the intent of clinical supervision. And so, and that doesn't really give you the time to do some of the strategies that we talked about in Module 3. So I would encourage you to think about, okay, if we're having this scheduled supervisory hour and we're doing some specific things there, under what circumstances am I available for other kinds of conversations in between there? If something can wait until the next time we meet, maybe it should, versus, okay, if there's a crisis, obviously I want to know about it. And so helping the student understand exactly what your expectations and boundaries are around that. And then if you're going to have any contact outside of the office or in any other kind of circle or sphere, what would that look like? It's also helpful in this professional disclosure statement to let potential supervisees know what your supervisory style is. So, if you viewed Module 3 already, kind of are there certain techniques that you like to use in supervision? What's kind of your clinical orientation? And how does that inform your supervision style as well? And maybe even just kind of your personality traits, who you work well with, what kinds of things you're looking for in a supervisee. And what is your view of the supervisory relationship? What are you there to do? What are you providing to a student or a supervisee? Now let's talk about supervision contracts. So just to clarify, the professional disclosure statement would be something that you would give to someone perhaps before you're deciding whether or not they're going to work at your agency or practice. So then if it's a good fit and you've both decided that, then here we get into a supervision contracts where we lay out really specifically what are the expectations. Now here at Evangel, we have our own kind of contracts that the students have to have you sign and submit to us. You can just make copies of those if you would rather do that, or you can kind of create your own for for your agency. But a supervision contract should clearly state the expectations of the supervisee. So this could include things like confidentiality. You should definitely have them sign an agreement that they're going to keep all the records and client information confidential. That kind of stating the expectations of what record keeping they are required to do, maybe even elements of professionalism, what it is that they, what you're expecting of them in terms of even how they dress or how they carry themselves. Even social media, more and more we need to be aware of what they're posting publicly. It's one thing on a private Facebook page or a private Instagram feed, but anything that, like on Twitter, if it's a public account or a public Facebook statement or that kind of thing, they need to be aware that there are certain things that they probably need to, lock down before they see clients. Also emergency procedures and things like that. Also, a supervision contract should clearly state the duration of the supervisory relationship. So what is the start and end dates? How many hours per week are they expected to be in the office and seeing clients? If you're building a caseload, kind of how's that going to look? How long do you anticipate it will take for them to have a full caseload? How many clients do they feel is their limit? So it kind of goes both ways as well. What's the commitment on both sides? And then also you want to have some goals. So similar to a treatment plan that you have with a client, the supervision contract should list at least 3 goals that the supervisee has for their semester or for their year, for the duration of the supervision. How do they want to develop professionally? What do they want to learn from you? And then underneath each goal, they should have 1 or 2 kind of methods by which those goals will be met through the supervision process. And you can even include some of the interventions that you plan on using in supervision with them. So let's talk about supervision records. This is not the clinical record. This is what you are keeping as a supervisor to document your supervision of this student so that you have a record of what you have been doing with them. And so there's a few different things. We're going to talk more specifically about kind of different ways you can keep session notes. But for now, just to say, you should be keeping a note for every supervision session. And so that's just important. I rechecked the ACA ethics code and it really doesn't speak to this in there at all. I hope they add that in at some point because we do have a responsibility to document what we're doing in supervision. And it's honestly really protection for us as well if there was any type of liability issue that comes along. So you want to make sure that you have documented clearly, just as you would with a clinical situation. Same with confidentiality in terms of how you would treat these session notes or supervision records, that you have to maintain confidentiality of the content of your supervision sessions and certainly of the records themselves. So definitely if they're in an academic program, you need to share information with the student's academic program. We are co-supervisors of the student. So while we might not be privy to specific client names or things like that, we are privy to the information about the student. And so hopefully that's a two-way street on communication there. You also want to make sure that the records that you keep are locked or encrypted, depending on if they're electronic or on paper. But the best rule of thumb is to basically treat them the same way you would a clinical record. And then evaluations is another piece of your supervision record. And so in Module 6, we're going to kind of talk about the ins and outs of providing formative and summative evaluations to your supervisee. But for now, it's important that you maintain a copy of that. And so again, if a student like from Evangel is, has an evaluation that you have to submit to us for our records, it would be great for you to keep a copy of that as well. That's all for this video. And the next video, we are going to be talking about specific ways that you can keep records. So, okay, what are the actual systems for note keeping? Which was a really big question of mine when I started supervising. I saw that I was supposed to keep notes, but I had no idea there's not a lot of systems for doing so. So we'll go into that in the next video.